Kahsennenhawe dear Yujats, here today to give you an overview on the Kahnawake residency law. So what we're going to do is I have Melanie Gilbert here and Alan John Rice. Basically, we're going to go section by section through the law and have open discussion about the different components of the law to give you a better understanding and overview of the Kahnawake residency law.
Title. The title of this law is the Kahnawake Residency Law. Purpose. This law provides the criteria and procedures for the authorization of approved Kahnawake residents, the revocation of approved Kahnawake residents, the issuance and revocation of residency permits, work education permits, and humanitarian permits, and for the eviction of those living in the territory who do not have the entitlement or permission to reside under this law.
I'll just give you a little bit of background. So in 2017, we had gone to the community and we asked for the mandate to separate the sections that pertain to residency out of the 2003 Kahnawake membership law. The community did provide the mandate through the CDMP, community decision-making process, and therefore we started the front-end work and all of the community engagement to get direction on creating a newly developed Kahnawake residency law. At the time, there was the impending legislation from the federal government entitled Bill S3, which would give approximately 360,000 potential individuals, what we'll say Indian status under the Indian Act, and a number of them could have been tied to Kahnawake, maybe around 36,000 of them. So we were very concerned, and we also knew over time how people in the community who were upset about membership issues, it wasn't really about membership, it was about who was residing in our community. So now we finally have a mechanism to be able to provide people who might not necessarily be from our community, but they want to live here, permission to do so through a permitting system. There are a number of different permits that we will present today. But I thought it was important that, we continue to educate the community, because there's still a lot of people who don't even know that, this law is here, that it exists. And I think today we're going to focus on the components that are going to be coming in force in the next couple of months. There are some sections that will have a delayed coming into force probably in the fall. So for today's purposes, we were going to cover those sections. So with that, we'll get into today's presentation.
Entitlement to reside. Only Kahnawake of Kahnawake have the entitlement to reside on the territory, provided that entitlement has not been revoked under Section 15 of the Kahnawake of Kahnawake law. Permission to reside. Any person who does not have an entitlement to reside pursuant to Section 4 must file an application for approved Kahnawake resident authorization or for a permit. Being authorized as an approved Kahnawake resident or being issued a permit provides, while the authorization or permit is valid, a permission to reside on the territory, but does not create any other right to entitlements or services and may be limited by Kahnawake laws, regulations, and policy. So after hearing that section, I think what's really important, the biggest message to get across to the community is that people who are already on the KKR do not have to apply for a residency permit. So if you're not sure whether you're on the KKR or not, you can call our offices at 450-638-0500 and ask to speak to Jenny McCumber, and she can tell you whether you are on the KKR or not. So that means if you're not on the KKR, you would have to look at our listing of permits to see which area you fit under. So later on in the presentation, we will actually go through the different areas and the different types of permits that we do have available, and we'll go from there. The Residency Registrar. The Residency Registrar will verify and authorize, pursuant to this law, approved Kahnawake residents, verify and decide applications for permits, decide the merits of a complaint for revocation of authorization of an approved Kahnawake resident or a permit and administer and implement any procedure, process, or policy required to give effect of this law. The Residency Registrar will, at all times, respect the principles of fairness, dignity of person, and compassion that are consistent with the traditions and customs of the Kahnawake of Kahnawake. Ensure that all information in their possession is held in confidence and is not divulged, discussed, or released to any person or authority, except with the permission of the person to whom the information relates, as required to verify a person's residency, as may be required by access to information laws applicable within the territory or in accordance with this law and regulations, and ensure the information contained in the permit list and the approved Kahnawake resident list is safeguarded from loss, destruction, tampering, and unauthorized use. The Residency Registrar will make available for the review of a Kahnawake of Kahnawake during normal business hours the names of those who have been authorized as approved Kahnawake residents or those who have been issued permits. The Residency Registrar will make available for the review by a Kahnawake of Kahnawake during normal business hours the names of those who have had their authorization as approved Kahnawake residents or permits revoked, or those who have been evicted from the territory or who have had an eviction order issued against them. So what that section means and what that section talks about is that each permit that we have available has an application process that's attached to it. The different types of permits that we do have, we have an AKR permit, we have a residency permit, we have a work education permit, and we have a humanitarian permit. So for each of those, there's a fee attached, there's an application process, there's a criminal background check that needs to be done, and then it comes to me. I'm the registrar, I'm the person that's going to be making the decision on each of the applications. Approved Kahnawake resident. Application to be an approved Kahnawake resident. A person who is not recognized as a Kahnawake of Kahnawake, but who meets the criteria to be an approved Kahnawake resident, must apply to the Residency Registrar to be authorized as an approved Kahnawake resident within 30 days of residing on the territory. Applicants who are residing on the territory when the law is enacted will have 1 year from the date of this section coming into force to apply for this authorization. During this year, the application fee will be waived. A person whose name was on the non-member resident list as defined in the Kahnawake membership law immediately before the coming into force of this law does not have to apply to the Residency Registrar to be an approved Kahnawake resident. These persons will automatically have their names placed on the approved Kahnawake resident list. Eligibility to be an approved Kahnawake resident. The following are eligible to be authorized as an approved Kahnawake resident. A person who has 3 Kahnawake of Kahnawake great-grandparents and has immediate family and community ties. A person who has 2 Kahnawake of Kahnawake great-grandparents, has immediate family, community ties, and who was raised in the community. A person with Konwenni ancestry who was adopted as a minor by a Kahnawake of Kahnawake after November 10, 2003 and has immediate family and community ties and who was or is being raised in the community. Aya Konwenni Dega who was married to a Kahnawake of Kahnawake or someone eligible to be a Kahnawake of Kahnawake prior to the 1981 moratorium and is still married and residing with that spouse or is still residing and was widowed while residing in the territory, or a minor who was adopted by a Kahnawake of Kahnawake prior to November 2003 and who has reached the age of majority. Approved Kahnawake resident list. Except as otherwise provided for in this law or its regulations, the Residency Registrar will keep a confidential list of names of those persons who have been authorized to be approved Kahnawake residents. This list will be updated by the Residency Registrar as required by this law and the regulations. Once a person is authorized as an approved Kahnawake resident, their name will remain on the approved Kahnawake resident list until such time as they request to have their name removed, their authorization as an approved Kahnawake resident is revoked pursuant to this law, or they are deceased as evidenced by proof acceptable to the Residency Registrar, at which point the Residency Registrar will remove that person's name from the approved Kahnawake resident list.
So essentially, the approved Kahnawake resident area of the law was put in place to account for those people in the community who have resided in the community for a long time and who have lineage, who have Kahnawake lineage. They just may not have the Kahnawake lineage to meet the criteria for the KKR. But this is a status that once a person applies for and receives that permission to reside, they don't lose it ever. They hold on to it for life until there's such time that it can be revoked. If that doesn't happen, they have that up until the time of their passing.
Permits. A person who is not recognized as a Kahnawake of Kahnawake or authorized as an approved Kahnawake resident who wishes to reside within the territory must apply for a permit from the Residency Registrar within 30 days of residing on the territory. A permit holder may apply for a renewal of their current permit or apply for a different permit. Residency Permit. In order to be eligible for a residency permit, the applicant must meet one of the following criteria as verified by proof acceptable to the Residency Registrar. A person who has Ungwehue ancestry and is married to or living in a common law relationship with a Kahnawake of Kahnawake and has immediate family and community ties. Or a person who has sufficient knowledge of the Kahnawake language and Kahnawake culture as evidenced by the results of a language and culture test taken in accordance with the regulation on language and culture testing and has immediate family and community ties. A residency permit is valid for 3 years.
Okay, so essentially the residency permit is a section that was put in place for those people from different communities who wish to reside in the territory. As though it is encouraged that our people here have relationships with other people from other territories, and in some cases those people would like to reside here. In order to do that, those people would have to just prove their ancestry from their band or from their tribe, wherever it may be. And if they're in a common law relationship with a person on the KKR, they're eligible to apply for a residency permit. Not just the relationship, it could also be a close family member who's also residing on the territory. They'd be eligible to apply for a residency permit, which consists of 3 years. Followed up, it can be renewed for another 3 years before the person has to go through the whole process again. In order to get a residency permit, there are certain criteria that have to be met. One of them is a criminal background check, which has to accompany that.
Work Education Permit. In order to be eligible for a work education permit, the applicant must meet the following criteria as verified by proof acceptable to the Residency Registrar. A person who has Ungwehue ancestry and is working within the territory or is attending an educational facility within proximity to the territory. Work education permits will be valid for a maximum of 1 year. If the duration of the applicant's work or education is significantly less than 1 year, the Residency Registrar may issue a work education permit for less than 1 year.
So the work and education permit was put in place in order to accommodate for those people who are attending either schools within the community or even close to the proximity who may not have grown up here or meet the KKR criteria. If they're from another community, they're eligible to apply for a work or education permit, whether they have a job on the community, a job within the community, or if they're attending an educational facility on within the territory or on the outside. This lasts up to a year before it has to be renewed, and has to be renewed each year.
Humanitarian Permit. In order to be eligible for a humanitarian permit, the applicant must meet one of the following criteria as verified by proof acceptable to the Residency Registrar. A. Be terminally ill and need assistance or lodging from an immediate family member who is a Kahnawake of Kahnawake and who resides on the territory. B. Be providing assistance to a Kahnawake of Kahnawake who is terminally ill, or C. Be providing assistance to a Kahnawake of Kahnawake who has a disability or illness which requires specialized care. The Residency Registrar will determine the length of each humanitarian permit to a maximum of 1 year.
So the humanitarian permit was put in place to accommodate for those people who have family who may not have any Konwenni lineage or Kahnawake ancestry. And if it comes to that situation where that family member is terminally ill and needs a place to live out the end of their days, they are eligible to apply for a humanitarian permit and go move in with the person on the KKR, so that person can care for them up until that time of their passing. The other place that it accommodates for is for those people who need specialized care. If they need specialized care and a live-in employee to do that, the employee is eligible to apply for a humanitarian permit, which can last up to 1 year, will have to be renewed after that. And this is to take care of those people who require that specialized care and will require a doctor's note along with that.
Permit list. The Residency Registrar will keep a list of the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of those persons who have been issued a residency permit, a work education permit, or a humanitarian permit. This list will be updated by the Residency Registrar as required by this law and the regulations. Once a person is issued a permit, they will remain on the permit list until such time as their permit expires and has not been renewed, their permit is revoked pursuant to this law, or they are deceased, as evidenced by proof acceptable to the Residency Registrar, at which point the Residency Registrar will remove their name from the permit list. I think what's interesting to note in this area is that there are checks and balances at every step. So after the consultation process and the CDMP process, the people who had attended those meetings had said, we want to know who is going to be applying for these permits. So for each of those permits, there's going to be a 30-day posting. So people are able to make objections, to make comments, different things of that nature, to make sure that people know who is applying to be a resident on our territory. Other than that, the listing of people who are accepted for permits will be available at our offices for people to come and look at, and also when the permits do expire. So I think it's more of a transparent process than it's been in the past, because of course this is a new system. We've never had a permit system, but now we'll know who's living on our territory, who they are, where they're from, and really why they're here. So I think it's really important. Public notice of application. If the application is not summarily dismissed, the Residency Registrar will place a public notice of the application for authorization to be an approved Kahnawake resident or the application for any permit under this law. The public notice must include the name of the applicant, the number of minors or dependent persons that will be residing with the applicant, the name of the applicant's parents or affiliation to Kahnawake, the section of this law under which the applicant submitted their application, and the deadline to receive written objections concerning the application. The public notice must be posted for 30 calendar days. The deadline to receive written objections will be the last day of the public notice.
Every single person that's residing in the territory is going to be required to be on one of the lists. So if you're on the KKR, you're automatically entitled to residency. If you don't meet the criteria of the KKR, there's a possibility you meet the criteria to be AKR, which is an approved Kahnawake resident. It's a one-time application, and as mentioned, you're entitled to be here for the rest of your days unless otherwise revoked or something happens. All of the other permits, in terms of people who are not necessarily from our community, are going to have to apply to fall under one of these categories. And I think it's important to note, as mentioned, that people can call the office and inquire about an individual before they make a complaint, because they might have a permit to reside, and just so that you have that information. The complaints process, as I mentioned, there's a delayed coming into force, so that will be later on, probably in the fall. And we will definitely do a similar exercise like this to give an overview and explanation of all of those other sections and components of the law. But in terms of the transparency that Melanie spoke about, it is important, that the community knows who's here. That's long been one of the, I guess, arguments or points that people in the community would make is they want to know why people are here. They want to know that they're of good moral character, hence why we're having a background check, that they want to be a part of the fabric of our community. They're not here just hiding out or, so anyways, I think it's all new and it's going to take some time to become accustomed to it. But in the end, to me, it gives me a sense of safety, in knowing who is in our community and that they've been vetted and that they're, on one of these lists and they're here for a purpose.
Ineligibility. An applicant may be deemed ineligible and their application may be denied if the applicant has, through an act or omission, directly or indirectly, contravened a provision of this law, is a danger to the community, has been involved in criminality or organized criminality, has directly or indirectly misrepresented themselves or withheld material facts relating to a matter relevant to this law, has committed a material breach of a Mohawk law, tradition, or custom, or, for a residency permit, does not possess sufficient knowledge of Kahnawake language and Kahnawake culture, as evidenced by the results of a language and culture test taken in accordance with the regulation on language and culture testing. Everything that we're talking about here today can be found on kahnawake.com/residency, and you will see the law will be there, the regulations will be there, the criteria will be there, and you're more than welcome to call the office, to call me, to call Alan John, and find out if you need more information about residency and permits.
Nyawako for tuning in today for this presentation and overview of the Kahnawake residency law. I know there was a lot of information presented here today in terms of the different types of permits and entitlements to reside on the Kahnawake territory of Kahnawake. But again, this is new in terms of the way we're going to be putting this forth. We do actually have enforcement now for people who are residing here illegally. That was something we didn't have in the past. So we hope people will, take it seriously. And if you need more information about contacting to see if you're on the KKR or if you're eligible for any of the different permits, we're here to answer your questions. So Nyawa again, and we will see you for future information purposes on the Kahnawake residency law. Konwenni again, Nyawa.